people and Bitcoiners against spam, and honestly, everybody is against spam. Like nobody likes spam, but there might be different definitions of what is spam or not. Why we're doing BIP-110 is to keep Bitcoin good as money. And that's the real use case. That's what made Bitcoin huge and maybe even growing. So we need to preserve that. Now there are a few questions we should ask ourselves. One is this change at consensus level working? Like, is this the solution, finally, to the spam problem? Second question is, are there trade-offs? And third, is this going to happen? And that's also an important question. Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. I would really like to have some time to talk about BIP-110. This is a very important topic, controversial topic maybe. You might be interested in this for different reasons. One, to know what is going on, what is going to happen maybe, most likely, we'll see. And two, I think it's also, always important to talk about the topic of data encoding and spam in Bitcoin. It's always relevant. It's not new. It's something on which it's good to have an opinion on what is done, what can be done, and so on. And also, I think it's a very nice topic to talk in general about the governance of Bitcoin, how governance works, and so on. It's a good case study, at least. But let's start from the facts. I would say, like, what is going to happen? What is happening right now? What is BIP-110 even? So BIP-110 intends to implement a soft fork to reduce the possibility to store arbitrary data on Bitcoin. So it's a soft fork reducing, the scope of the rules, limiting how Bitcoin can be used, basically. The idea is really in the name. So reduce arbitrary, reduce transaction data. And this is a soft fork, and it's a temporary soft fork. It's intended to be a temporary soft fork, basically to do something as an emergency and then stop or reconsider in 1 year. We will see how it goes exactly. But we arrived to this stage because there was a previous debate on whether transaction relay policy could be used to limit what some people consider spam, or anyway, non-monetary transactions. We will see what it means exactly. But yeah, there was already this attempt to limit spam using transaction relay policy. That didn't really work, honestly, but in any case, this escalated into trying to fix this at consensus level. So maybe we should also talk about what is the difference between policy and consensus. But let's go there step by step. So this was the idea. Let's try to fight spam or reduce spam as much as possible. And how to activate this? So there were different paths towards activation of these rules. And the first path was basically ask miners to do it, or anyway, wait for miners' consensus on it. The idea was that miners can signal whether they want to do this change, this soft fork, from the current consensus rules to the new consensus rules. And as soon as 55% of the global hash rate mining Bitcoin would agree with signaling approval of this new change in rules, then the soft fork would be activated. Not immediately, it would lock in first, and then after 2 weeks, or anyway, a mining difficulty adjustment period, that is normally 2 weeks, then basically the new rules would trigger. So this was the normal path, a path that could have happened and can still happen if miners, 55% of the hash rate, agrees on activating the change. This started in December 2025. So since December 2025, or anyway, end of last year, 2025, miners had the opportunity to trigger this soft fork. But we have seen that this didn't happen yet. We are now I mean, maybe the approval increased over time a little bit, but it never went significantly above 1%. Maybe 1.1% of the hash rate today is signaling approval for activating this soft fork. So miners didn't buy in yet, even though they have nothing to lose, triggering, at least signaling this approval. But there is 1% only for now. Now the thing is, the proposal already stated since the beginning that this was not the only possible activation path. So let's say that we don't reach this 55%. There is a deadline. There is a mandatory signaling date, or a date. Basically, at a certain block height that is now expected to arrive in August 8, unless the hash rate changes dramatically, the global hash rate of Bitcoin. But most likely around August 8, we reach this block height. And at this block height, we start with mandatory signaling. So BIP-110 has this date for mandatory signaling, meaning that you are basically forced to signal approval for this change, or your blocks, if you're a miner, the blocks that you build will be rejected by all the Bitcoin nodes running BIP-110 compatible client. Okay. So now this becomes a completely, there are new elements to consider in the game theory of what is going to happen. Because yes, the mining hash rate approving BIP-110 with the signaling is only 1%, but there is a multitude of nodes running a BIP-110 compatible client. So, if the majority of miners doesn't approve this change by August 8th, then their blocks will be rejected by the users of Bitcoin running this BIP-110 compatible client. So what happens? What happens is that the rest of the network that is running the other, the normal node that is not implementing this change, they will keep going with the miners who are not implementing the change, while the BIP-110 nodes will follow the blocks mined by the BIP-110 approving miners. What is this? This is a chain split. So this is not happening often. That's why it's very important to talk about it and understand what's going on. Chain splits can be problematic, especially not only if they're contentious, but especially if there isn't a clear winner in the short term. So, if there are these two chains that basically are almost 50-50% in terms of total hash rate, continue progressing, have real support behind them, then it becomes complicated because the value of the network might be not clear, may be split. There might be annoying issues with replay, like you want to spend Bitcoin on one chain and then the same transaction can be replayed on the other chain, depending on how the soft fork works and which direction. But yes, this is a real problem. So there is a question on what is going to happen, because yes, there are many nodes running Bitcoin BIP-110 compatible client, but Bitcoin is not a democracy. It's not that you count the number of nodes and the network with more nodes wins. Also because you should consider if it's easy to do C-bills and run one entity running more nodes. But in general, that's not how governance works. It's not like just you have more nodes and you are Bitcoin. The good thing of Bitcoin, by the way, is that it's hard to change at this point. Why? Because it works very well. It's a good design. It's not easy to randomly change it. And that's what you want for an asset that has good monetary value. For good hard money, you don't want it to be easy to change. It's not enough to spin up a big number of nodes and then suddenly you change how Bitcoin works. That's not it. But let's see. I mean, before thinking about whether there is a chance that BIP-110 fork wins, maybe we should talk more in detail about what BIP-110 does. Because yes, so at a high level, it's about fighting spam. And the previous attempt was to use transaction relay policy. What does it mean? Policy in transaction relay means, like, maybe we should think about how transactions are created and propagated in the network, and then make it into a block, and then they make it into the canonical chain. So, if you're a user of Bitcoin, you run a node and you send the transaction to the network, to your peers. And the idea is that some transactions are valid by consensus, but are considered non-standard by the majority of the network or by whatever node. Each node can define its own policy on which transactions they want to propagate and what not. Each node has this decision, has this sovereignty. They can do what they want from that point of view. If they don't want to propagate certain transactions, even though they would be valid, they can do that. And the transaction relay policy is doing exactly that. Basically, if you believe that certain transactions, even though they are valid by consensus, they are equivalent to spam, you can decide not to propagate them. And that's what the transaction policy does. Now, people and Bitcoiners against spam, and honestly, everybody is against spam. Like, nobody likes spam, but there might be different definitions of what is spam or not. But let's say how it is. Like, a lot of Bitcoiners are against using Bitcoin for inscriptions, ordinals inscriptions, storing images, storing arbitrary data. The threshold on what is spam or not changes depending on who's talking about it. But in general, there is a big chunk, significant, really, of Bitcoiners who hate or they think that it's a real problem that some other people are using Bitcoin for storing images, data. So what they do, they apply this policy to block the propagation of these transactions. The problem is that transaction relay policy works for real only if basically the whole network or a huge majority of the network implements the policy, like 95%. Otherwise, you will find peers that are willing to propagate these transactions to the miners. And by the way, even if that doesn't work, you can just send the transaction to the miners. And if you find miners with high enough hash rate that are willing to include your transaction and put it in a block, this block will be sent to the whole network. And since the transaction is valid by consensus, then it will be accepted and it will make it in the chain. Even the chain view of the people who implement this transaction relay policy against spam, they don't have a choice there because they receive the block and all the transactions in the block are valid, including the transactions including ordinals. So that's why policy doesn't really work or fix the problem of spam. And so the natural next step, and I was waiting for this, honestly, because we had this talk last year, never-ending talk about policy, whether filters work or not. And honestly, they don't work. So the next step is make the change at consensus level. And this is what BIP-110 is doing. So with BIP-110, it's not only, you set the transaction relay policy and you don't propagate the transactions. No, the transactions that implement ordinals in the previous implementation, they become invalid at consensus level. So this is why it's a soft fork. Basically, some ways to spend Bitcoin, and some of these ways were, we can say, abused or anyway used in other ways to include ordinal inscriptions. These transactions are not valid anymore by consensus on BIP-110 nodes. This is the big change, and this is basically it's the escalation of the debate that we had last year on the use of filters to try to limit spam. Now there are a few questions we should ask ourselves. One is this change at consensus level working? Like, is this the solution, finally, to the spam problem? Because, by the way, nobody likes spam. Like, we should define spam, I insist, but nobody likes spam. So is this the solution? That's one question. Second question is, are there trade-offs? There is no free lunch. It's not, again, Bitcoin is hard to change because it's by now a good design for the purpose that emerged into what Bitcoin is. So we'll see. So are there trade-offs? And third, is this going to happen? And that's also an important question. But let's see the first, like, is this the solution to spam? It depends. So for sure, it's not like magic, silver bullet, it works magically, no spam anymore. So for instance, some of the things that this soft fork does is invalidating certain transaction structures that were used by ordinal inscriptions to encode images in the blockchain. Those ways to do it, they are not valid anymore. So what happened next after the BIP-110 specification is finalized? Well, people found other ways to encode images in the blockchain. So the thing is, it's clear to everybody, I think, and also the proponents of BIP-110, that fighting spam is a continuous cat and mouse race. Like, you remove certain ways to spam and more ways to spam will be added. BIP-110 proponents may tell you also that it's now harder to spam. Like, you cannot just dump on the op return, on op return whatever data as much as you want. You cannot do that because now op return is limited to 83 bytes. That is the same level of the policy that was used before the change in Core V30, by the way. So 83 bytes is not a lot. You cannot dump huge, big images, or anyway, high resolution images in 83 bytes. So it's not as easy, and that's true. But if people want to spam with my definition of spam, yeah, I can use my definition. My definition of spam is something is spam if the goal is to attack the network, if the goal is to abuse resources of the network. Basically, you are asking the network to do something without compensating it enough. So it's a very unbalanced way. You do little work, or you pay a small amount in resources or Bitcoin, whatever that is, and you impose a huge weight on the network, a lot of work, and you potentially probably really try to attack it. So if this is the problem, if you want to fight this kind of spam, this hostile attack on Bitcoin, the hostile attack is motivated enough to find a way to get around. You are putting now these 83 bytes. Attackers will find a way. So yeah, there is a lot to talk about in general, also about op return. Op return was not created to allow people to spam on Bitcoin. Op return was actually created to reduce the negative externalities of using Bitcoin for storing arbitrary data. Because without op return, people were using transaction data like fake coins, fake public keys to store data. And that way to store data on Bitcoin has much worse impact on Bitcoin than just using op return. Op return transactions are provably unspendable. And that's why you don't need to store these UTXOs. They don't contribute to UTXO bloat. So there is that. But in general, I can accept that reducing the ways to store arbitrary data on Bitcoin might have a positive effect on the amount of data that is stored on Bitcoin. I don't think it really solves anything because attackers will keep attack if they want to attack. By the way, it was already predicted or feared that people will attack Bitcoin and maybe Bitcoin will die even when Core V30 was shipped and we started having nodes relaying transactions with basically unlimited op return usage. But that really didn't happen. So in general, I would also like to say that, again, Bitcoin is hard to change. You really need full consensus among all actors. And it's not only miners. It's not only node runners or economic nodes. You need everybody. It's not only developers. For sure, it's not only core developers. You need full, still rough. I mean, it's never 100%, but you need full buy-in by all Bitcoiners. It's not working just like that. That was one question. Is BIP-110 fixing the problem? And I would say no. It helps. It can be a step in a good direction, maybe. Like, I guess it doesn't hurt on the level of spam. But then we also have the question on, are there trade-offs? And yes, there are trade-offs. So first of all, any change, if not tested enough, may contribute to bugs and issues in implementation. So that's one thing. And for a change to happen, there must be a really good reason. Second, one of the ways to limit spam, or anyway limit all the possibilities to store arbitrary data or to put arbitrary data on a transaction, is to remove so-called upgrade hooks. So what BIP-110 is doing, they don't allow certain ways to do upgrade hooks because those ways were abused or anyway misused or used not for upgrade hooks, but they can be used for storing arbitrary data. And with BIP-110, you don't have this possibility. Yes, but also you don't have the possibility to use upgrade hooks. So you're losing something. It's true that this is going to be only a temporary soft fork, so it's not like no upgrade hooks forever, but it's up to debate what is going to happen in 1 year. Like, is it really temporary or not? We'll see. Also, it's only 1 year, so probably we are not going to think about an upgrade and implement it in only 1 year, but you never know. And I also like to think about the quantum upgrade. I don't believe we are going to have an emergency in less than 1 year, but it's good to have the optionality of upgrade hooks, and maybe we can use them anyway for first steps toward quantum resistance. So there is that. Now, in general, I don't think that, but that's just my opinion, I don't think the good aspects of BIP-110 are worth having a full upgrade, having an upgrade. There are trade-offs, but this is just what I think. I think it's also, it's actually more important to know what the rest of the world is thinking. So, as I said, the support in terms of hash rate for now, it's only 1%. That's near nothing, honestly. Like, now, we don't know if this is going to increase from here to August 8th and forward. We don't know that. Everything might change. By the time we record this, that is July 24 to August 8th, or even 1 week from now, we don't know. But if the hash rate supporting BIP-110 stays at 1% at the time of mandatory signaling, we have this chain split, right? I mentioned the chain split. So there is the original Bitcoin, or anyway, the current Bitcoin consensus rules going one way, and then there are the BIP-110 nodes or miners going the other way. But with 1% of the hash rate and unchanged mining difficulty, because you inherit the current mining difficulty, you inherit it. And the mining difficulty is set right now at the current level of hash rate, 100%. So you have only 1%. What this means is that you will have one block every 1,000 minutes. That's 17 hours or something. And that's forever. That's huge. Because, by the way, the mandatory signaling doesn't implement the consensus rules. The consensus rules are activated after a mining difficulty adjusting period, that is 2 weeks. That means this is not activated immediately, and you have to wait these 2016 blocks times 1,000 minutes. That's years. years of nothing being enforced, other than the miners supporting BIP-110 not going anywhere. Because, by the way, if you want to spend Coinbase transactions, you have to wait 100 blocks. So again, it's 100 blocks times 1,000 minutes. It's a long time. So, 1% is not going anywhere. Now, could a hard fork happen to change the mining difficulty and reset the mining difficulty? That can also happen. It will be even more controversial. Anyway, we will see. But if things stay as is, BIP-110 is not going anywhere. So things can change if we have hash rate support, more hash rate support for BIP-110 from now to August 8th. Can that happen? Yes, it can happen. I mean, I don't know the future. Nothing is impossible. And by the way, we have a huge mining pool, it's Foundry, that is running a vote right now, basically asking the miners contributing to the mining pool to vote whether they want to support or not BIP-110. And this is an important vote because Foundry has 28% of the total hash rate. That's huge. Now, take that 28% plus 1%, 29%. It's still going to be slow compared to the other version of Bitcoin, but it will be fast enough to reach the mining difficulty adjusting period, the 2016 blocks, and basically be back on track soon enough. So that can work. But of course, we don't know if Foundry is going to vote for that, Foundry miners. By the way it's going to work, it's either 0% or 28%. There is no intermediate possibility for the Foundry vote. So what Foundry is doing, asking their miners to vote, and if 50% of the Foundry hash rate wants to support BIP-110, then everybody will need to follow this decision. So the whole 28% will need to follow this decision. So it will be big. Now, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to say, I mean, I don't know what they're going to vote, so we will see. There are other mining pools that have instead said, absolutely no way we're going to support this. And by the way, if you want to think about it, miners are supposed to be economically rational actor, like not really emotionally involved or whatever. It's a business. Their business is to make money, mining Bitcoin. And how do miners make money? Well, there is the subsidy and there is the transaction fees. And, in general, a soft fork that is limiting the ways in which Bitcoin transactions can be used, it's effectively reducing demand for Bitcoin. At least in the short term, it can be a reduced income stream. It can mean reduced income stream, meaning maybe by default miners are not inclining towards a change that is reducing the income stream. But this is very simplified and very short term, because the other view that also makes sense, that why we're doing BIP-110 is to keep Bitcoin good as money. And that's the real use case. That's what made Bitcoin huge and maybe even growing. So we need to preserve that. We need to make sure that Bitcoin stays as hard money. So it's good, it's okay to remove this source of demand. People will say just spam or demand. Anyway, this source of transaction fees, because in the long term, this is how Bitcoin survives and doesn't die from spam. So there is that. We'll see what miners are doing. If I'm forced to make a prediction, I honestly believe that miners, the support will stay low, but that's just my prediction. There is another scenario in which miners flip from here to August 8 or after the mandatory signaling period. And if they have 70%, 80%, 85%, and so on, suddenly they are the chain that has the advantage of the higher hash rate. And yeah, at that point, most likely BIP-110 will win. What does it mean to win? Like, it's not enough to have a chain that has more work and is longer, or more work anyway, because if that was the case, then we had to basically accept or believe or state that miners decide what Bitcoin is. But yeah, it's not that simple. There are other, you need buy-in from the whole network, including Bitcoin holders, including exchanges, including basically all entities that have a say on what is the real Bitcoin. So that's not obvious. It's not enough to just have the chain with the most work. There is no single class of entities. So it's not the developers, it's not the node runners or the miners or the economic nodes like exchanges, ETFs, DATs that alone can decide what Bitcoin is. So it's more complex than that. But when you have a situation in which one of the two chains has 1% of the hash rate, then there is really, I think it's really clear what is going to happen. But yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about. I thought this was a good chance to talk also about Bitcoin governance. And from now on, we will see what's going to happen. I will keep monitoring, of course. I can be surprised and things can change. And there is this also scenario, not impossible, in which we are really at a 50-50 situation. And then nothing will be resolved at August 8th. And we will have some maybe chaotic time in which two versions of Bitcoin have equal, almost equal opportunity or to become the Bitcoin, the hard money. Because again, BIP-110 is also about doing something, to tell the world that this is the purpose of Bitcoin. Monetary transactions only. Don't try to use Bitcoin for storing data. That's not the purpose. So, among the supporters of BIP-110, I can see this, and I can sympathize with that, with this effort and this goal to keep Bitcoin pure as money, as hard money, as store of value as much as possible. I don't think they are wrong in this, urge or in this idea. I just don't think BIP-110 as is the solution. But yeah, I will stop here because there is more to talk about, but we can go more in detail on certain aspects another time. Then for now, that's all. And let's see what happens from here to August 8th.